Welcome to Black Hat Windows Security Conference 2002, held February 7th through the 9th in New Orleans, Louisiana. The following videotape was recorded live at the conference and produced by the Sound of Knowledge Incorporated.
Introduce our first keynote speaker, Tony Sager. He's around here somewhere. There he is. Tony's the chief of the Systems, well, you can see, Systems and Network Attack Center. And we're lucky to have Tony here today. NSA hasn't been terribly, I've been talking a whole lot to the public since the 9/11 incident. So this is one of the few chances that we've got somebody from the agency to kind of come out and talk to us. So let's give him a warm round of applause. And with that said, I'd like to introduce Tony Sager.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. Good morning, and thanks very much. And contrary to what Jeff said, I really am not armed, BB gun or not, so it's they don't send us out in public with anything dangerous. First of all, I want to take the opportunity to say thanks. We don't get out much in the public from the National Security Agency, as you know. And this is a really good opportunity for me to talk to an audience that I think has a critical role to play in the whole national security problem of network security. The NSA was invited to come by Jeff to give our perspective on the network security problem. And you wound up with me as your speaker because, among other things, I run a center at NSA, this Systems and Network Attack Center. And we're responsible for it. We actually produce and publish to the world the NSA Windows 2000 Security Recommendation Guides. And if you've been following us on the web, you know that there's a large body of information that we've been putting together and giving out to the public. So this is part of a change in attitude for us in terms of our perspective and work in the security problem. So I'm probably not the usual sort of speaker that you'd expect to see here, and that's okay. If it's any help, you're not the usual kind of audience I get to talk to. And I think it's actually me being here, that's part of the theme that I wanted to address with you today, is the shared problem that we have. So I hope that it all works out for you. And my purpose for coming was I really wanted to share a story with you about the Information Assurance Organization at NSA and the development of the Windows 2000 security guides. The story is instructive, I hope, for all of us, not because I think we did the best guide possible or that we're absolutely right or that the guides are perfect in any way. But I think the story is worth telling because it illustrates some really important themes that affect the security of the nation and of the world. And it lets you know where I'm coming from in terms of things like turning vulnerability knowledge into positive solutions, gaining cooperation across the government, the changing nature of the relationship between vendors and the government, and then gaining partnership and agreement with industry. And I think all these things come out with the Windows 2000 story for us. And it's a story that we're still learning to grow. And again, NSA is not by tradition out there involved in the network security community. So it's really a change for us, but it's also a great opportunity for everyone. And behind all this is our desire not to pontificate to you about what the right thing to do in Windows 2000 or any other topic in security. It's that we want to build things that are usable, that are technically sound, and that in fact make a difference out in the operational network world. So let me try the story here. And if you'll forgive me, I grew up as a bureaucrat, and so I always have to give you a little bit of context for what I do for a living. My center is located down the bottom of that chart there. This is a wiring diagram with no wires, by the way. Within NSA, I'm located in the Information Assurance Directorate, and that's, loosely speaking, that's the protection mission that NSA has. And people haven't made any movies about us or anything good like that, but there really is a major protection activity that NSA is responsible for, and I've spent my career in there. Among other things in my center, we've published to the world, I mentioned the Windows 2000 security configuration guides, the NSA Cisco router security configuration guides, and then the Windows NT guide. And then there's a bunch of other products I'll reference later. The Systems and Network Attack Center is a technical organization that analyzes the vulnerability of current and emerging technology. And we do this in the lab, and then we do it also on site for a number of customers across the DoD. And if there's any doubt in your mind, by the way, the customers do invite us to come in to test the networks that they have. It's really it's similar in spirit to the work that a lot of you folks do, both in the lab and in field settings, as consultants, as security analysts, and so forth. And In terms of having a good job in the government, it is a great job in the government. It is exciting. The technology is changing every day. And lots of things are in the news, and they're very important and current to us. So it's really a great place to be. But the real challenge that we've been trying to address over the last couple of years is how do we take this vulnerability knowledge that we've gained and translate it into some usable solutions for people? Because I think a big shift for us over the last couple of years is changing our focus from being clever at finding vulnerabilities to being clever at helping people turn those into something useful. Anyway, based on my experience, I'd like to offer some observations about the world of network security and insecurity. And this is an audience of practitioners primarily, so I'll repeat lots of things that you guys already know, but I wanted to restate them here because they give you a context for where I'm coming from. So in terms of observations about the net, no secret to you, new technology is coming fast, and everything is very fragile. And a large part of my business is providing security advice to decision makers and to technology users across the government on a wide variety of topics, from current events to long-term architectural issues. And everything today happens way too fast for us. We don't have time to look at this to really understand it. The implications are unclear. The standards come, standards go. And everyone is under a lot of pressure. They want the latest technology now. They want it, like yesterday. They don't really know what the requirements are, but they must have it. And that's the way our world works now. And the vendors race to the market, and it's a demanding world in terms of the network and the communications. And so things break in all kinds of unexpected ways. It's a very challenging problem to give reasonable and honest technical guidance in a world like that. Another observation, many of us are analyzing the same products and the same technology, and that's true in lots of different places. For example, across government, my center is one of numerous centers across government in various parts of the services and so forth that's devoted to the study of security, vulnerability, and emerging technology. And this audience represents really well the equivalent community in industry and in the private sector. And likely you guys outnumber us significantly, if that's any information for you. And today, when I started in the business a long time ago, government technology was really unique. We were driving a lot of the technology. We built a lot of things because either the market wasn't there or because we had specific security worries. Today, we're using the same products. We're on the same net. Good guy, bad guy, private, government, it doesn't really matter. We're all stuck with the same security problem to worry about. And that's a big driver for me, is how do we make progress when we're all on the same net? And that's been a driver that gives NSA the incentive to get us, folks like me, out into the public, is that we're consumers also. So we're hopelessly dependent upon the same products that you all are struggling with. Another observation with all this, we have a common problem, and the users of the technology, the users are flooded with security news. So, and we're generators of it also, by the way, at NSA. Bulletins, advisories, virus things, just an incredible flood of stuff, newsgroup postings, articles of all types. I don't know about you guys, but we don't have time to sort through all this stuff. There's tremendous amount of duplication and noise. We have no time to really understand what they're saying, understand the issues, look at the trade-offs in our own operational nets, and then make intelligent decisions about what to do. And even those of you folks that follow this stuff for a living, I'm sure you're swamped, and I'm sure you could tell me how many hours you must spend or a percentage of your time in trying to keep track of the breaking news and all this stuff. And it's really an incredible noise factor for everybody. Here's a statement. Most of the current problems that we see, problems as in specific attacks that occur, can be stopped with knowledge that we already have. And this is one of the challenges that we face here. Almost all attacks are based on a relative handful of fundamental problems. And these are assertions. Almost all attacks are based on problems that have been identified previously, and in most cases, the vendor has told the public how to fix. Almost all attacks are blocked by well-understood and easily available security configurations, and it doesn't have to be ours. It can be, you can get your guidance from vendors, from SANS, from the FBI and IPC folks, and lots of different places. And the configuration guidance that are out there, the countermeasures that are out there, they're not perfect, but we think most of them apply in most cases, and the rest is relatively easy to tailor to specific situations for you as consumers. So the countermeasure problem is a kind of fascinating one. There are things out there, lots of them are clunky, lots of things that you could do for countermeasures are expensive, but they're generally available. So that's the dilemma that we have. Even the problems that we know how to solve today, we're not solving in the big sense for a variety of reasons, and no blame is implied there. So kind of the bottom line for me in terms of characterizing the problem is it's a shared problem. And to look at a shared problem, we have no options but to think about shared solutions. And this may be obvious to you, but this is a big stretch for those of us that grew up in the intelligence community. Information assurance is a complex problem for us. There's no magic bullets. It's not like shooting all the sysadmins and starting over is going to solve any problems. We've got a large chorus of generic demands to the vendors. We want better security. Please do better. We've got lots of attempts to turn every sysadmin into a security wizard. We've got the ether is flooded with, again, bulletins, warnings, news, advisories. None of those has any hope of succeeding. They're all just pieces of a partial solution. They're just touching at the edge of this. And so I say that we, and when I say we, I mean the big collective we. That means the folks like you, the folks like us. And believe me, this is not we're the government, we're here to help you we. That's a whole different part of the government, so you'll have to invite them back next year. We all have to share something in the solution space because we've got vendors who are a critical part of this, the vulnerability analysts, folks like a lot of you, standard setters, some of you are out there, systems owners and operators, I know I met some of you last night, users, and yes, even the lawmakers are a vital part of all this. So quick background, then onto the Windows 2000 security project for us. So this is the backdrop that led us to take this project on. Our center had a very successful track record with an earlier Windows NT security guide, and I think some of you had seen it, but it had been distributed within our normal customer base, but was not available to the public. And this literally started as a sort of a training exercise, as an operation for us to collect our thoughts on Windows NT security. I mentioned we do security testing for a significant number of customers around the world. And the guide eventually evolved into a way for us to capture lessons learned, to put them into one place. The one thing turned into a paper, which turned into a document, which eventually turned into a CD, which turned into some support things to go along with it. So we had a several-year track record in Windows NT security and in providing guidance that had evolved into specific products. And when you look back at the early days of Windows NT, especially in the Defense Department, there were lots of people reaching the same conclusion, right? We need to capture some thoughts on Windows NT security. We need to put them into one place. And you could have looked around in my circle of government, and we've done this, to count the number of different and almost unique Windows NT security guides that were out there. There were numerous other similar ones, and this is a little hint as to how government works. Every one of us looked at the problem and convinced ourselves that our requirement was so unique for Windows NT security configurations that we couldn't possibly use what the other agency had developed. And that's just the way that grew up. And I make no claim that NSA was any better than anybody else in that, by the way, because we had at least 2 guides coming out of NSA that were competing for attention out there. So, this was just a common problem. We all reached this conclusion. We needed to build some of these things. So here we were several years later, and we looked at Windows 2000. And a conclusion we came to very quickly was this job is much bigger than we know how to do. And so we started to think seriously about how we were going to actually implement this. So if you'll forgive me a moment on a little high-level thing here on principles. So as we thought about the Windows 2000 project, I was putting together what I call our local business case for building the guides for that. And it was kind of murky to me as to what we should do. There were a lot of different options, a lot of partners we could pursue, a lot of ways we could go after this. And I actually settled down, in fact my project team leader is in the back of the room here, and I wrote down some guiding principles. As I said, based upon the things I mentioned to you earlier in the talk, we're not quite sure what to do, but when in doubt, do these, okay? So I wanted to, number one, get out of what I call the sole source business, that is us producing this on our own. And we literally did this. We made a list of everyone that we knew of in the government that had produced a Windows NT security guide at some point in the past. And the goal was to call down that list, offer to work together with anyone we could find, and offer to pool resources, share the labor, and so forth, and come up with a joint document. And it was on the order of 10 to 12, 14, depending on how you count and who got double counted and so forth. But it was a significant number of players out there. So we literally started calling down the list and found that there was no list anymore. Everyone had dropped off the list. No one, except for very minor pieces, still saw themselves in that business. They either no longer had that mission, they had lost the funding to do it, and with no arrogance implied, they, about 3/4 or more, had already adopted our NT guide anyway, and they just wanted to know when the 2000 guide was coming. So we looked at that and said, wow, something's happened. A lot of things are starting to converge. And we found a couple of organizations that, at least up front, were willing to provide some technical help. That didn't really happen on the development end. What it did open up for us was a large-scale beta test program where we really tried to get the community involved in testing these things before they went out for mass distribution. And that change in focus was a big step for us too. That is, we didn't want to come across as producing the ultimate guide and we're going to throw it out there and take it or leave it. We wanted to be realistic. We wanted to take into account the realities of running a messy network in a messy environment. So we needed the feedback from lots of different people, and we had no intention of building a large test lab of hundreds of machines to try out all the different ways, for example, that different people want to use the net. Anyway, so I think the good news was there was a fair amount of convergence of thought across government. We all realized this problem was too big for any of us to handle. So this community way kind of became the story here. So that meant for us, developing a successful guide meant we had to enlist the people that ran networks for a living. We needed them to be directly involved. Because for us, a guide is not an ultimate statement of you must do it this way. It really represents trade-off. Trade-off between usability, applications that run and don't break, and security, prudent activities that you can take to block problems that you believe affect you. And a big step for us also was we decided to turn to the public. So we turned to public partnerships as a key part of this. And again, that was driven by the notion that this is really a shared problem, and that for the DoD and for the mass market, there really isn't a lot of difference in terms of the security problem. So we contacted places like SANS and a nonprofit called the Center for Internet Security, and have started to partner up, and I'll give you some examples of where that's really starting to pay off. And yes, we went out of our way to involve Microsoft in the process, because they are a critical part of this problem, and I know that's it's a hot button issue for a lot of folks, but their cooperation to help us understand that the technology was essential to producing something that was in fact technically sound, reasonable to support, and actually did something useful that could be supported by the vendor. And they provided tremendous information to us, great insight on how things worked, access to information, so that we understood, so that we could make prudent recommendations out there. So, especially, and they gave us lots of insight into their experience, in particular in supporting the federal customer base, the kinds of applications that were out there, and the kind of breakage that we might see. So that was an integral part of this whole thing. What I wanted us to do was focus on what I thought our core strengths and really our mission was, which is analysis. You know, it's easy to spend a lot of labor in producing output of things, but really our business is doing analysis, so I really wanted to focus on that. For example, rather than us try to figure out what does a Navy's application environment expect to look like for Windows 2000, well, they have a test lab already devoted to that. In fact, they have multiple test labs, as do all the military services and lots of different government agencies. So rather than us try to anticipate that, we enlisted those folks when we could find them as beta testers for us, so that we could get the feedback right away, get the buy-in early, and make sure that we put something out there that was reasonably aware of the kinds of things that people expected out of it. And we did that across literally dozens of organizations, and I'll give you some numbers in just a second. And then the last bullet for us, again, a real change in thinking and culture for the National Security Agency, and this has been a big theme for us. Keep it broadly shareable. Again, this is a shared problem, and we back up that belief by going out of our way to work closely with public organizations. And in a real break from NSA tradition, again, many of you know and mentioned to me last night or this morning, the release of lots of this information to the public via the NSA website. You know, we also take your commentary, your feedback. We set up a way to do that through the mail. And as you can imagine, once you open yourself up to the public, especially a place like the National Security Agency, dealing with the flood of things that come back isn't always fun. But it has undoubtedly helped us. We get lots of good comments, things that we take back, think about, make changes to the guides, and try to improve them for that. So it's been a really interesting conversation for us to be a part of that network security community in a much more open way. And to let you know how things sometimes work in government, in another one of those, we're like, oh, what were we thinking stories? We literally volunteered to set the DoD baseline security standard for Windows 2000. There had been an executive level agreement in the highest levels of the department with Microsoft that there should be a single security baseline for Windows 2000. Well, I may have mentioned to some of you, I'm just about to celebrate 25 years in federal service, so any 25-year bureaucrat knows you never volunteer for anything because you're opening yourself up to all kinds of problems, and we did. But that took us into a whole different world of DoD working groups and like a brand new acronym soup that was different than the acronym soup that we normally live in. Tiger teams, we had lots of people who think they're in charge of all this, but it also gave us a way to directly contact the military services and all the different parts of government, get their feedback. There was a voting forum set up to air differences and to pull together a single opinion across the department. And it's not an easy challenge to gain that kind of agreement across the department, but it was an important step for us to take to provide real technical content as opposed to let that be a policy activity where some high-level thing is thrown out that doesn't have a lot of meaning from our perspective. So in parallel with all that, we approached numerous DoD programs, people that we dealt with, things like NMCI, if those acronyms mean anything to you, and DMS, and said, well, as you're migrating to Windows 2000, what do you need and when? What kind of specifications are you looking for? What kind of guidance can we provide for you? And so we linked up with a number of DoD programs and in fact became pre-adopted by those programs before we even completed the document. So a big step for us here. Okay, so all of this led us to pursue a development process for these guides that brought together all these different aspects of this. Our work in the lab, our involvement with a large and diverse beta test community, to bring in sort of a flavor of operational reality, our experience testing networks all across the DoD and with other customers, public partnerships, public release of the guides, and then incorporating feedback from all kinds of sources. So we tried to pull it all together into a really challenging activity for us. Now, don't let me fool you, okay? I put up a nice process slide. This was drawn for me by somebody else. There is no fancy program office that's doing this, okay? There's no big funding behind it, other than the manpower that I agreed to devote for my center. There's no staff that's answering the mail, answering the email, drawing fancy pictures or anything like that. This is literally a grassroots operation. It's a small number of my frontline technical analysts, the people that come out and test networks for a living or that work in the lab looking at new technology. And they worked hard to build a technically sound and useful and supportable guide. And they own this job from start to finish. There is no big bureaucracy behind it. It's literally almost a hobby operation that sort of grew on its own way. And I think that's a lot of the strength of it, is that it's people that have to deal with system owners every day, that have to answer the phone calls. And so they really feel a sense of ownership of it, and they've just done an amazing job. Yes, there's a few, I'd count myself in the management hanger-on class I use here. My job is to take the good work they've done, put it in a context, build relationships around it, and figure out how we can use it to best advantage for the nation to improve security. So. But the thing I always try to remind myself, the only thing that really matters is the content, the things that people actually did in terms of work and making those recommendations. So a few numbers here, and this is one slide to help you understand the magnitude of the job, the impact that I think it's having. It's easiest to kind of look at a few of these things. So I mentioned there was a small core of people. The number is in 5 or less that were really with this from start to finish, that provided the overall guidance to it, did a lot of the work, did the overall editing and so forth. There's really no fancy staff again. But we tapped the work of up to a peak of 27 people over 11 months. Most of those people were only involved for a brief period of time. They were brought in because they are the folks that I have that are studying the specialty topics, I call them, things like DNS and IPsec and Kerberos and things like that. They're brought in as needed based upon the analysis they've been doing for months and years, trying to translate that into useful configuration guidance that's given out. So the core team works along, grabs these people from other parts of my center as needed. And so at its peak, we'd count about 27 people involved with that. When we say 2,000 guides, it's actually plural. There's lots of documents out there, and in total we've released over 20 individual guides or unique documents that are out there. So the 2000 security guide itself consists of 19 separate documents. And if printed, we don't do this anymore, by the way, it's 1,000+ pages. Includes 6 INF files that cover security for lots of the different subtopics, workstations, servers, Windows 2000 domain policy, ISA, and so forth. We have one guide that is in beta testing, maybe out by now, for IPsec. And then we're considering the addition of another topic or two. So if you have any favorite topics that you think are glaring omissions, please let us know. In addition to this Windows 2000 set that's out there, there's a pile of several others. We recently released a complete guide on securing Windows NT 4.0, along with the support INF files and so forth. And this is an older set of information. I referenced earlier we had a long track record with Windows NT, but it wasn't released to the public for a variety of historical reasons, I'll say. So it really just got on the web within the last couple of weeks or so. So it's a new area for us. We also have an extensive router security configuration guide, mostly aimed at Cisco brand routers. Has detailed guidance, has sort of a top 10 summary list, and a 2-page quick reference card. We also have 3 different email and executable content guides. We call it executable content. A lot of you folks call it mobile code or things like that, Java, ActiveX, and so forth. We have several of those. We have 7 supporting documents, which include something we call the 60-minute network security guide, no association with any trademark or copyright name. And the guys swore to me that it was was readable in 60 minutes. So I was able to read it in 60 minutes. I wasn't able to comprehend it in 60 minutes. So you can use that for calibration if you like. And then the guide for Apache, so and a number of these. And they're all available at www.nsa.gov. So I mentioned beta test sites as a big part of our Windows 2000 development. We got excellent feedback from test sites in dozens of government agencies. We had defense agencies. We had civil agencies also involved. And the goal here was to bring reality to this, as I said before. Will they operate in a reasonably wide variety of environments? And we also wanted to build a sense of buy-in across the community way ahead of time. And you know, a lot of government stuff comes out as what I call the publish and cringe model. You publish it out there, and then you wait for people to tell you how bad you are. And you know, it's an easy trap to get into because it's easier to publish than it is to ask for feedback right up front and take your lumps early in the process. But that's what we really wanted to do. If you looked at the total of all products, it's a couple thousand pages. Again, we don't do this anymore, but 11 INF files. You know, this is a pretty substantial body of work coming out of us, and really has been on the web just recently. Our original Windows NT guides, by the way, we distributed as paper originally and then as CD, and once we hit in the tens of thousands of CDs distributed, the logistics of it just became too much to manage, and so we really, you know, we moved to web distribution through different government agencies and so forth, and then have moved the NT guide directly to the public there. But it was literally in the tens of thousands. And again, these are analysts that arranged for the printing of the CDs and did all the work to put this together. Another key in our part of the world, I mentioned earlier, adoption is the DoD Windows 2000 security baseline. We've seen a rapid growth in a number of other places that have adopted the guide as official. And that is, organizations and programs agree to accept it as a standard in there. And we don't present this as this is the gold-plated, must-do, we know better kind of guide. We believe it represents a solid trade-off between prudent behavior and operational necessity, that is keeping things that run. A fair amount of our time now is spent on helping people tailor the recommendations to their specific environment. You need to have certain applications running, or ports up, or certain legacy things that just have to be there. And with our customer base, then our guide does not take it or leave it. It's here's a starting point. Now let's see how we need to tailor it for you, and let's make sure we understand the trade-offs. That why is that requirement there or that recommendation there? What might be the trade-off then in your network, and how can we work around that at some different level in the system? And then again, in a real shock and a surprise to our system, not to us, as I noted, for the first time ever in my center's history for sure, and in any large-scale way for the National Security Agency, we started the process of gaining approval for public release of the 2000 guide and then follow-on security products. We released that first set of Windows 2000 guides quietly. That is, no press release, no notice. A few friends knew who told a few friends, got picked up by a few news groups, word started to get out and so forth. And so, we watched the interest in it rise very dramatically. Let's just say the NSA website has never seen traffic like this before. It's way out of scale to what they were prepared to deal with. So I thank you for your interest. Please come back, see what we have there. And it's really been a good eye-opener for our system. That is, if you want to be involved in the security community, then you have to put things on the table. And that's a fundamental belief of ours. And so having done that, you have to be prepared for the large, loud, noisy conversation that follows. And that's a large part of our culture change here for us. So here's the good news. We got hundreds, and we still get lots of comments, feedback, suggestions, recommendations, ideas. We get the occasional conspiracy person calling up to wondering what we're doing. But as you might have guessed, we don't have a long history of dealing with this kind of public response and public activities. It's really been great work for us. Once we got approved for a public release, we put the guide on the website. We set up an email address to collect your comments. We literally crossed our fingers and hoped that we didn't do too bad a job, and waited to see what happened. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. Lots of good suggestions, some good ideas, some of which we incorporated right away, some of which we looked at in different ways to help us understand better down the road. So no question, being involved in a public way has improved the product, and I hope you're seeing it over the evolution of what's happening. And then the last of the numbers here, we did received the national level award for this. I had the pleasure of accepting on behalf of the team and our partners a Government Technology Leadership Award from Government Executive Magazine. And so that was a real coup for NSA to be involved again at that level of interest in the public and to get the feedback that helped us with that. So, what the numbers say, we've had a lot of success, a lot of attention, a lot of good things have happened, but here's a reality check for you, okay? All the interest, all the downloads, we stood back from this and looked at it and said, well, what difference have we made in the network security world? And the reality check answer is not a lot yet, okay? Someone asked me one day, what does it mean to be the DoD standard for Windows 2000? And I told them, well, the DoD loves standards. That's why we have so many of them across all kinds of different topics, and most of them compete with each other. The reality is it doesn't mean a whole lot. It doesn't mean a lot until you change behavior. That is, the way systems are operated, the way we purchase systems, and so forth, and the way we operate them, the way we train people. So it's really a step to take that. So we really wanted to not be content with the success that we had up to this point. Because the nightmare that worried us during this whole thing, as I've told you a couple of times, we didn't want to produce this gold-plated, unusable standard. The government can do lots of that kind of stuff. Our goal was to do technical analysis and produce something that people wanted to use, and that we could help them use by producing other things to go along with that. So our goal was to avoid the appearance of handing down something from on high. It's always been the belief in our center that if you want to put security changes in place that last, you have to involve the people that run the networks, and that's just a tenet that we have to believe. It seems obvious, but if you look at the way the DoD operates, and lots of government, and lots of other places too, and a lot in the public sector, the system is geared towards taking a one-time snapshot of security, give the system operator a laundry list of thousands of nits of information about your system and the problem, and telling them to work it off. Start at the top, at maybe the high, mediums, and lows, depending on how your tool reports it, and good luck. And they usually make it through a few, and then they get tired, and they get overwhelmed by the other things of keeping the network running and the mail server died and so forth. It is a very challenging problem. So my view is our community didn't provide information in a form that was really usable to the person operating the network. So if you're going to improve security, you've got to look at things that are a mix of technology, training, planning, procedural things, and really the operator or the owner of the system is the key to all those. You really have to have them involved. So the bottom line, guides are not inherently good. Okay? They are only valuable when they're used and integrated in a way that networks are managed and operated. And that means providing specific value in terms of improving security. They have to be easily integrated into the way people operate their networks. They have to be supported with tools, and they have to help people with providing implementation of security policies, both at the site level and at the higher level, and I'll mention that. So the bottom line again, guides are really not the end product. They're really the beginning of trying to improve security in the operational nets for our customers. So a watershed change for us occurred early in this when we stopped thinking about the guides as this inherent goodness, right? Producing a guide is a good thing by itself. I started to think of guides as representing agreement. Agreement among my community of technical analysts with their partners, along with the people that operate the networks. And we all work in the field where nobody, I don't know what your experience with it, in my experience with network security, nobody agrees on anything. There's lots of noisy voices here, and gaining agreement is a really challenging thing. So I thought of the guide as, hey, the operators and the analysts came to agreement. That's a pretty powerful analog for us to think about. How can we do that? And it was really counterintuitive to me too, originally, to think of it that way, because I grew up in an analytic community doing analysis, and analysis is obviously good, right? So definitely a counterintuitive problem. It's sort of like, by the way, inviting the NSA guy to come talk to you about partnership and working together and openness and so forth, right? You have to start thinking of our roles in this differently, and that's the way I'd like to bring it here. So given this viewpoint, we thought about how do we milk this agreement among all these folks for everything we can get. And the goal was to start identifying and building what I call a cottage industry around agreement as embodied in these guides. So things like, we focused on the content of the guides, but what about the sort of how-to and tutorial and training information that should go around that? Okay, that would make a nice complement to the things that we were doing. Some tools to implement the settings conveniently in the context of how we operate that network. Tools to monitor and test compliance against agreed-upon standards. Do that in place for the operator, as opposed to auditors coming in after the fact to tell them what's wrong. Software development guidelines for applications. So how do we expect programs to behave in a network whose behavior we're defining through these guides? And then complementary guides for special purposes like web servers and mail servers and so forth, things that are really focused, firewalls and so forth. And then translating some of these things into specification or contracts, the way people buy things, can we affect that? Because that really is the front end of the problem. So all of these things, in fact, are starting to happen. And they're happening not just in Windows 2000, but across a broad range of technologies. And some of you folks out there are actually participants with us in this whole thing. And I make no claim that it's because the NSA guide is out there. That has been a catalyst and a rallying point for a lot of work. But what's really happening, and this is my view of the network security community, is there really is a growing body of people that's willing to put their labor into a common pool. And it's government, it's industry types, it's academic types. We're a lot more willingness to share and cooperate for the common good. And I'll give you some examples of how that has affected the work that we're doing today. And again, some of you are involved in this, and some of the talks are also. Hope you don't mind the cartoon. I do not have a professional staff that prepares these, so this is just me whacking out with clip art here. So I started to think of the guides differently. I thought of them as agreement, and by the way, my analysts don't agree any better than your analysts do. So getting them to sit down, come up with specific recommendations, and put them down on paper as a key model for us. From that, you produce INF files, and or things that embody them. And now you can take those, and Microsoft has changed a lot of its focus, so now there are tools to implement these things more easily under Windows 2000. So you get the management console things, the snap-in that lets you do that. And then we start to, like I mentioned, we focused primarily on what I call the content of the guides. What are the specific recommendations that we want to put out there? And we didn't spend a lot of time, frankly, on the tutorial parts of this. We had done a lot of that with our Windows NT guide, but we decided to drop that approach for 2000 because it was just too expensive for us. And again, we don't have professional writers doing this. Well, the good news is, in partnership with NIST, and you may have seen they just released, I think, 2 or 3 days ago, let me get the name right, System Administration Guidance for Security, et cetera, et cetera. And I believe they're going to be speaking later on in the conference here. Their starting point is the templates provided by NSA. Okay, and what they build is the tutorial how-to kind of parts around it. And then they address sort of more comprehensively other issues like configurations, virus checkers, and that kind of stuff. So an excellent complement, and we're looking at a number of different things like that to partner up with NIST and places like that. Our focus has been on our primary customer base, which is really in the Defense Department and in the intelligence community. But and as I mentioned, with very, very minor changes, the NSA guide became the Windows 2000 baseline standard. But what about the public? I talked about this being a shared problem, and I really meant it. So what we did was approach folks like SANS and the Center for Internet Security. And if you look you may or may not be familiar with their work. I'll give you a link later. They released not long ago a Windows 2000 benchmark along with support tools for that. Well, that, if you look in their introduction, they graciously acknowledge they started from ours by agreement. That is, I turned over everything we were doing to them. And they use that as a starting point to build their guide, which is really aimed at a broader public sector market and more towards the financial community, auditing community, and so forth. That's really their niche. What we get in exchange for that is they developed a configuration checker so that you can monitor compliance, test compliance against a set of INF files, theirs or ours. So with that, we now have a tool to turn back to our customer base for support. That is a way to now you've got a way to put the guides in place, and then you have a way to monitor how they're doing at any given time. So a real change in focus there. By building just a little bit, and this is relatively modest technology, this is not, again, any multi-million-dollar program. This is a couple of people putting together a few ideas. We're able to build a complementary set of things that help us all and really address this idea that the public and the government don't have a much different problem. So this whole notion is making guides real. How do I get them out there? How do I make them pervasive? Adoption, I mentioned a few. I'm just going to summarize these here. I mentioned getting the guide declared as official, okay, by either an organization or what we would call a program. That is a place that gets to determine a standard. Adoption by itself is not a particularly useful thing, just to let you know. I told you the story of the DoD standard. But it starts the process of getting the guides into things like purchasing specifications, training plans, policies, and the whole rigmarole in the DoD for getting a system approved to operate. And so, I know some of you consult and help out in that part of it. That is the risk decision that says it's okay to run this system this way. That's a very formalized thing in the Defense Department. And there's a process to come back and make sure it's still okay to operate this machine in that way. And so tying into those kinds of things is really an important aspect of making guides real. In the government world, even a technically better idea doesn't stand a chance of being used unless you can convince the system that it supports all these goals, right, of making intelligent risk decisions and so forth. So we're very conscious of how to do that. Another key problem for a lot of our customer base has been the large number of standards. Again, I said the DoD loves standards. We have plenty of them. But there were so many were slightly different. And through names and programs like, again, NMCI and DMS and DII-COE, slightly different standards for Windows 2000 or anything else that just happen to evolve by whatever local means are not helping anybody. They just cost a lot of different work. So by getting programs to converge, you get a narrowing down of the number of unique things. So that way the analysis doesn't have to be repeated and the testing doesn't have to be repeated. And the focus is better. Are there specific, for example, in NMCI, is there some tailoring going on of our guides in the context of NMCI? Absolutely. And we get involved in that discussion so that there's an understanding of why we recommended certain things. But the focus is 80% of it's going to be the same by the time it's done, and probably a lot more. So that we don't need to have a unique one for every case. And that way the customers are less confused, we're spending less labor, and we're reusing the work that we're already doing. So we've got some examples. There are literally dozens and probably hundreds by now. And again, once you release to the public, you lose track of these things. So we've got guides all over the place, adopted from everything from hospitals and hotels to small businesses to large businesses to lots of non-US organizations, government and non-government. So it's really exciting to see the kind of rate of adoption there. Even with Microsoft Federal, we know that they are big fans of our guides and use them as the basis for their support to the federal market. So there's a lot of things going on. They're starting to come together. This notion of integrating into the network management, I gave you some examples of that. That for us, a key is how can we help people manage their systems according to these recommendations. And we in the analysis community needed to take the extra step to help them do that. So again, this has all started to work out. I mentioned the partnership with the Center for Internet Security and configuration checking tools. We're looking at some pilot implementations jointly with our friends in DISA to sort of help one of the joint commands implement these things in place, put in place the monitoring tools and so forth. And so we understand better, and so that we have some good examples to point to in the DoD. Also talking with folks about building some training kinds of things around it. And part of the reason that I want to describe some of these things to this audience is help me find opportunities where you can build upon or we can find ways to partner up in some of these things here. We're not looking to run this or control this. We're looking to provide some value on the table and then get us all to converge towards some ideas here. Okay, and then this notion of edging earlier into the life cycle. That is, nobody in our world, by the way, believes that you're going to solve all the world's security problems with configuration guides. Clearly, we're at the tail end of the life cycle, right? We're fixing problems after they've appeared, after they're understood. There have to be ways to get involved earlier. We're working on a number of those in parallel, from slightly earlier to affecting how people buy things, to even earlier to how people develop things. And there's lots of activities going on. The NIAP is a National Information Assurance Partnership run jointly with NSA and NIST. There's application guidelines that we're not developing yet, but we're looking at and trying to find others who want to take that challenge on. So it's an exciting, I think, range of things that's starting to appear around the guides. And my hope is that lots more happens and that we're able to really turn this into useful stuff for the community. So, well, this audience, you guys aren't fooled, right? The guides don't solve all security problems. There's no technology magic. There's no silver bullet in all this. What we did, our ideas, by the way, you figured out, are no more brilliant than the ideas that are out in the community. What we did was attempt to translate our knowledge and then the collective knowledge of others about vulnerability into specific products, things that could go out and be used. And that's about all there is. We're trying to produce usable pieces. So no guide solves all the security problems. At the configuration level, the best you can hope to do is block a subset of the potential problems out there. But we have in the past not looked at this hard because we tend to think of this as just configuration stuff, right? And the real interest is in the new vulnerabilities. But any bit of analysis will tell you that, again, most of the problems that are out there are blockable, most being in the 80-90% range, depending on how you count. It's a significant subset, and it's a subset that I think we've not paid enough attention to. This is housekeeping, and this is the kind of stuff we have to do anyway, that is bring our systems up to some minimum security baseline. So you have to put some emphasis on here to block what I'd call the big pile of vulnerabilities so that we can focus, your community and mine, focus on what we think are really the more interesting and hard problems. But get away from this reactive notion if we can. You never get full compliance. I mentioned the idea that we don't have any expectation that people adopt this whole. I think it's we're confident that the work is good that we put out there and that the work we've shared with others is good that's out there. But there are lots of different considerations in your network that have to be accounted for, and they really are important to the security. So you've got to try to trade these off. In fact, I went to a meeting just by semi-accident, and AT&T was talking about routers, and this is actually their slide with their permission. And they mentioned they start from security best practices, and we had got a unpaid, unsolicited endorsement, and they said, by the way, what we use as best practice is the NSA's router guide. I said, well, thanks. They said, but look at all these things we do to tailor it for our use, okay, down to what actually runs. And this was important because I think they did a good job of listing the kind of things that you have to think about before you can, again, don't take our guide whole. Think about what it means to you, what your operation is like, what you have to have running, tailor it according to that. And for our customer base, again, we spend a fair amount of time doing that work with them. So it's important to get an idea that there's got to be some work done to apply these things in whatever situation is relevant to you. Okay, so you never get full compliance. You have to tailor, and the bottom line is you always have problems, residual problems at the system level. There are things you cannot block at the configuration level. Okay? There are things that you don't want to block at the configuration level because it's going to break the applications that you have running. So it really is important to realize that there's a body of things that have to be dealt with at some other level in the system. Okay? Security is a system-level problem. There's lots of complexity in trying to analyze it. A lot of you do this for a living. Guides are relatively easy to focus at a component level, but they're really hard to focus at a system level. So that's a challenge here. So the things you can't block at the component level, you're often dealing with at the system level, and probably at multiple points, at the perimeter, through isolation and so forth. And that's an important aspect of this, is you have to have an understanding where those things happen. So the long-term value of the guides might be, and this is just sort of philosophically speaking, is if it could take our attention off the big pile of vulnerabilities at the 80% level or whatever it is, to minimize that noise and let us focus on those harder problems, the ones that you have to deal with at different parts in your overall system. I think that would be a tremendous amount of value applied to this. So, and one of the reasons you come to a session like this is to find out about those things that you can't block with configuration guidance, right? And looking over the agenda, I know there are problems that are going to be presented that can't be blocked with these, and that's okay. I'll leave it as an exercise for you to figure out which ones can't, but our guys will think about that back home, I'm sure, too. So it's really an important problem to think about, to have a realistic view of what you can achieve and what you can't achieve with guides. Okay, I mentioned earlier I was pretty upbeat about a network security community that's coming together in lots of different ways. One thing that we are tied in pretty closely with, and not directly with the guides, but that relationship is building, is something called CVE, and I'm sure many of you know what this is. I spoke of the Windows 2000 guide as representing agreement among the analytic community and a community of users of networks. If you could imagine a way to get similar agreement on all the vulnerability reporting that's generated, the flood of warnings, bulletins, and so forth that we're all contributing to out there. Is this information a new piece of information? Is it a symptom of an older problem? Has it been verified by the vendor? Has it been confirmed? Do experts agree it's a problem that's worth our attention? Do my current scanning tools find that particular problem? These are the kind of things you have to deal with every time, and you have to think about with a flood of information in front of you. These are the questions that are taken on by this thing called CVE, Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. And it's organized as a community activity by a place called MITRE Corporation, which is a federally funded R&D center. And it's supported by a growing number of folks across government, across the vendor community, including some of the folks that are here today, and a number of individuals. And I won't go into any details on it, I just wanted to mention it, but visit their website. They have an extensive collection of information to help you understand what's going on. But think of it intuitively as a process that sorts through this flood of stuff. Okay? All these different submissions is what they call them. They remove the duplication, they tidy things up, and they come up with, this is very low tech, by the way. The key is human agreement, it's not technology. They come up with what they call a candidate, a reference number for the item information, and they come up with a standard descriptor and a standard name for it. And then they submit it out through a virtual editorial board. And the editorial board has names, and I'm sure some of you guys are involved in this. And the board votes yes or no. We think that's right, that's worth reporting. And that's a reasonable name and a descriptor for it. Okay? And if that happens, you wind up with something called an entry. That's a thing that's officially published and spoken of as a CVE entry. So a panel of volunteer experts, and we provide manpower to that volunteer panel also. So like guides, this level of agreement is interesting, but it's not useful by itself. What's useful is the things you can do on top of it. For example, you can, if nothing else, view CVE as a filter on the noise. That is, a number of people have looked at something and come to some agreement on it. Now, agreement takes time, right? Agreement can take days and weeks and longer. So the price for not being real time is you gain agreement, and that's a trade-off that we're often making, right? Do I take the latest and greatest, or do I really try to understand better? Think of CVE as a dictionary that you can build things on top of. Well, someone could build a database on top of it, right? Provide a way to search by product, link the data with the vendor links and the patches and all the things that go with that particular piece of information. And guess what? There's already a work example of that. If you go to NIST's homepages, there's something called ICAT. Okay, ICAT is really a search engine into this that pulls together vendor links and patch information and so forth with the vulnerability names. So, and to let you know that, the value I put on this, I had this imported to NSA's internal nets. And the reason is, I'll admit to you, that's better than any collection of publicly known pieces of information of this type that NSA has ever had before. Okay, so we had no magic technology for this. What they produced here is just a working pilot. It's pretty good stuff. So, well, suppose you had this thing called ICAT, okay, a way to search, link together the product information. Then you could build up, for example, a notification service, right? If somehow something the Ether knew about your profile, what you have on your network, you could be automatically informed every time something goes into CV that's relevant to you. Okay? And some of you I know do this for a living. There are notification services like this, a number of the folks in the community run. There is a pilot of this out there for free from Purdue, the Sirius folks, and it's called Cassandra, which is basically this activity here. So if there's any Purdue folks out there, good job for you. So the idea, though, is, again, once you have agreement, you can start building things on top of it that the whole community benefits from. If you could encourage the vendors of scanners to make their products compatible with CVE, that is, vulnerabilities can be identified and reported by CVE number, then you could assess the performance of that scanner against a particular set of vulnerabilities. For example, the SANS Top 20 list, or the NIPC SANS Top 20 list, or whatever your local 10 biggest problems in your network is, or whatever you like as your set of problems that you think really applies to you. You can now match up, in theory, the performance of scanners against this set that you care about. I think Nessus, ISS, Network Associates, I think a number of people have already either built compatibility into their products, and this is still fairly loosely defined, by the way, or are planning to, and have committed to do that. So a tremendous groundswell, I think, of interest there. Given that you could select these scanners based on performance against a specific set, you can then develop what I call a strategy for scanning, because scanning can often take a lot of time. So you could decide how to scan your enterprise, at what different times, at what different levels, at what granularity, and do that as part of an intelligent risk management process, as opposed to scan and give me a list of 1,000. So, and there's a worked example that matches very closely to this that NASA has done. It's not quite in the CVE context, but it's based on exactly the same people doing the same thing. In fact, if you could get all the people that are reporters in our world, right, the Joint Task Force and the NSA folks and the intelligence community folks and the NIPC and the FBI, the people that report for a living, they report attacks and what's going on. If you could get them to reference CVE numbers, right, this attack is based upon these specific vulnerabilities by CVE, you now have a way, number one, you eliminate some noise, because now we all know we're talking about the same thing, and we have a way to more quickly correlate the matching of specific vulnerabilities to attacks. And those are things that could prove immensely valuable. A number of folks in the reporting community, the CERT-CC, JTF, and so forth, have already agreed to do that. And if you look, a number of the vendors are. If you look at some of these advisories that are coming out, you'll see a little tiny CVE reference number buried somewhere in the bottom. So our center supports CVE in numerous different ways, because I believe it's a great community of activity. Now let me give you another hint on working with the government. Right? When the government guy says we support it, you're invited to ask for clarification as to what that means. And in particular, ask him what verbs he would use to really flesh that out, because support is one of those meaningless things that we say a lot of. So support means the following. We did provide some small amount of the seed funding for CVE, which has now been taken over by GSA as a government-wide activity. I provide a technical person who serves on the editorial board. And this is, again, more counterculture to NSA. We have someone directly involved in this discussion with the community that's out there. I serve on an advisory board for this, a government advisory board to help find applications for CVE. And we also have been refocusing our internal tools to be CVE compatible, because it provides us benefits too in terms of correlation of things. So, so we're also have approached our CIO and number of other folks to start moving down the compatibility road. That is, eventually we should be specifying as users network scanners that are compatible, and insist upon tools like that. So I think it's a great community effort, and it takes a lot of work that my center is doing anyway, which is grubbing through all this stuff, filtering the noise, and then producing something useful out of it. But by doing it one time in the community and participating, we all gain benefits out of it. So reality check, CVE still has room to grow. It is not a real-time notification service by any stretch, but it's really, I think, an important event in terms of translating what we know into something that we can all use. Okay, another partner I mentioned is a place called the Center for Internet Security. It's relatively new, but building momentum. And I mentioned them in a couple of cases. We gave them our Windows 2000 guide as a starting point for their benchmark. We in turn got the configuration checker and stuff we could redistribute back out. We're looking at potentially close collaboration. This is kind of their schedule of things that are in development and recently released. And again, another important part of the community, I think, in gaining agreement, primarily driven by the financial and auditing communities right now. And their model is a little different too. It's a nonprofit, and they have essentially no paid employees. Their job is to act as catalyst across the community. So they take things like our 2000 guide, and they pay a couple people, and then they find volunteers who are willing to take this, build upon it, maintain it, and then they typically pay for the support tools that will go around it. So it's, again, a way to rally the community around a common opinion and get much more focus and much more convergence on these things. And I believe it's the kind of thing we absolutely have to encourage to make any progress here. Okay, to summarize, I know I've thrown a lot of things at you, kind of stream of consciousness, but let me summarize some of the key points. And don't get your hopes up, you're not ready to go for coffee yet, because I have a couple more things to say. Shared problem, shared solutions. I hope that's no mystery or surprise or conflict to any of you guys, but it is important to think of it that way, and I think we've done our part. Community agreement is more important than what NSA has to say, and I think we've tried to take action to that effect. This notion of translating the work of folks like us and folks like you into constructive things, I think that's an essential part of the solution. Integrating all this into things that help people run networks better, really important. And this idea of gaining cooperation across there. And, is a really important thing. I could, the temptation was when I was writing these remarks down, I said, well, now's the time, right, for the big call for good behavior, rah, rah, let's work together, partnership is a great thing, and so forth. But this audience really deserves better. And I remember what I told you. When the government guy says, do good, pin him down, get some better verbs out of him. So let me give you some suggestions, and these are just some ideas here. Things that we can all do more specifically, right, to drive towards a solution for the community. Okay, for example, if you're in the vulnerability analysis business, if that's what you do for a living, well, these events are important, right? Keep finding what you're finding. I mean, it's important to understand these problems, but I think we all have to, those of us in this business need to be more conscious of how we share it, how we translate this knowledge into specific products, how we help people understand the class of problems, not the, this is just the next little nit of information to come down the pike, and then how we translate our knowledge into the countermeasure side of this. We need to give more credit to the people that are trying to help us make sense of these huge piles of things. For example, CVE is an important thing. You can volunteer your time to things like that, by the way. Community agreement type activities, I think putting your time into there is time well spent for us all. There's a topic that's kind of a hot button, which I can't do justice to right now. Vulnerability disclosure, right? There's sort of the full disclosure school, and then there's the the big companies must be evil school, and somewhere in between we hope is truth. But what is clear is we need to think about the community and gaining agreement across there on how to handle this kind of information. Give the vendors a chance to fix things. Don't want to put information out before we're really unable to deal with it. And it's really an important topic for us to have, I think, public debate on. So, if you are a security consultant, I strongly encourage you, let's all start moving people towards standards, as opposed to sort of wizardry type consulting where we tell them, we know better and we know some vulnerabilities and we're going to fix those for you. It's drive them towards the 80% solution of compliance with community consensus accepted standards. Make it your business to help them tailor that for their particular application. Help them then with the really hard problems, those 20%. What countermeasure things can we do at the system level, at the boundary level, and so forth to really deal with those high-end problems? Because that's where, if people that come to this, you guys want to work on the high-end, harder problems. There's no question. If you're in the auditing and testing business, make sure, start moving towards compliance with tools that support things like CVE, for example. Those are really important events for us to encourage that kind of behavior. We need to move away from providing people with laundry lists of vulnerabilities. We need to help them understand a mapping that compliance with guides helps us block large categories of problems. If you're a network owner or an operator, strongly encourage adoption of community-based standards, and then take this tailoring thing another step. But demand help out of my community, out of the vulnerability community, because we need to be up there more providing you with help. specific products, not just vague promises. If you're a standard setter and you're working the configuration side of this, and again, part of our labor is devoted to that, let's find some way to pool your ideas with the community. And it was already worth my trip, by the way, Jeff, to come to the reception last night, because I talked to numerous people who had good ideas, good feedback, and ideas for things we could do together as a community, where I'd be more than happy to put labor in from our side, under their umbrella, with whoever in charge. It really doesn't matter. I think a lot of good ideas came out of that conversation, so the trip's already worth it. We have to give up the idea that my guide's a little better than your guide, that I can produce something a little better than yours. Because maybe you can, but maybe the greater good is for us all to work together on that. If you're in the response or reporting business, encourage you to adopt things like CVE. Let's standardize on how we talk about these kinds of things. Let's start thinking about the flip side of the problem, the complement side of it, which is, well, what attacks are we blocking based upon compliance with standardized rules of behavior? Let's get a better understanding of what really works out there in the community. If you're a vendor or developer out there, and this is another one of those hot button things, right? The call to get vendors to develop better and more secure software. All I can say is please do better. Build with security in mind, test better, work through established programs to do that. These are really hard problems, but I get to see a lot of the money that's spent on marketing to bypass standards and bypass good behavior. Please put the money in the development side instead. Let's take a look at these standard consensus kind of configurations and figure out ways to translate them into development guidelines, things that help specify rules of behavior. We've all seen and talked about, I know, the press about Microsoft and what's going to happen, the emphasis on security. And, we all agree it's time, right? We all know this is a problem that we all must work on together. So let's move away from throwing stones at each other, and let's try to solve this problem here. And for the government types, my challenge, I think there's a few of you out there. So there was a running bet this morning. Was I going to be the only guy in the room with a suit? I can't tell. So there might be one or two others out there. I only wore this for you guys, so I want you to understand that. Government types, we've got to think hard about partnership and think about creative ways to work with the outside. Give up the notion that we're going to control this problem and the solutions to it, because I think that's old thinking. It's really not taking us anywhere. How can we combine ideas across the government instead of building yet another $100 million program to chase a few good ideas? We don't need lots of those new good ideas. We need a little more discipline, I think. So partnership, I believe, is a key to success here. And let me give you one more insight from a 25-year veteran of the government bureaucracy. Everybody loves partnership, right? We all say that. I'm sure I have posters back at the office that say partnership is good. But people like that, but they forget that partnership is really hard work. You have to give something up. That's what people don't remember all the time. Partnership means you got to give something up in exchange for agreement on a common goal and pursuit of that goal. I mean, that's what it means to me. And we all love this, greater goal stuff. We all salute it, and we can have posters for it. But giving something up is really a key to it for a greater cause. So what have we given up? Now, let me tell you a couple things. We decided to build our guide by consensus. So we gave up autonomy. We gave up the freedom to publish what we want, when we want, what we think's best. We have to be involved in a noisy conversation with lots of people and honor lots of opinions. And we don't get to control the output 100%. And that's a real culture shift for us. When we decide to make network operators a part of the solution process for these guys, right? We have to now edge into the really messy world of running a complicated network. And for some of you, it's much better than I do. There's lots of trade-offs to be made, so it's not easy to dictate gold-plated solutions for security. To do something realistic, you've got to involve these people. And so we deliberately took that on to again, part of this noisy conversation. When we asked for your feedback by going public, we gave up a bureaucratic anonymity. There's a lot of work involved in answering questions, looking at your suggestions, trying to track them down, trying to get back to you. And we're learning how to do that, frankly. It's not challenging. Again, there's no magic staff back there waiting to answer your questions. It's 3 or 4 analysts that are minding the store and perusing what you have to say and making an honest technical effort to answer you. When we put our work in front of the public, we gave up whatever little bit of mystique NSA may have left. We're happy to give that up in the name of the greater good, because obviously we're not 7 feet tall, nothing personal, of course. It is really a challenging problem. And when we put our work out there, you realize these guys aren't brilliant, okay? No more brilliant than the rest of the community is. There's no magic bullet in those guides that we put out there. That's our best shot, by the way, okay? It represents opinions from lots of people, but there's no magic in it. And we have a workforce of very bright, very dedicated people, but they're struggling with exactly the same problem with the same skills that you guys are. So, to wrap up, and I appreciate your patience and listening to my message here. I think we're at a crossroads in the business. Okay, there's been a groundswell of support, interest, and cooperation. And I tell people that this was long before September 11th, when the interest was really there to work together. I attribute a lot of it to Code Red burnout. A lot of us are just tired, right, of tracking this stuff down and figuring out what happened, explaining to everybody, and recovering systems. We're getting worn out on that. The thrill is gone with that. It's time to solve some problems. So, we took on this 2000 problem, but I view it as a partnership where we've really involved a lot of people in there. We're proud to have that lead role. We're proud of the work that we did, but it's really the product of a partnership, and it involves people like Microsoft, involves people all across the DoD, involves people all through the private sector. So it's a very important event for us to really take some work on there. Okay. All right, if I haven't convinced you anything yet, let me try one more time and I'll wrap up. Appreciate your patience. So working together. So why should you bother? Okay, well, I thought about this. I wasn't really going to give you a slide, but I thought I will. There really is a large extended network of people. And some of you talked to me last night and this morning about things, the interplay between things that we're doing and how we can reinforce that. And I think it's really, really exciting. So again, don't let me convince you. There's no magic plan. There's no incredible set of view graphs here that I'm hiding on you. This is a story that we're literally making up as we go in terms of how to work together on this stuff. So why bother? Well, okay, this works for some of us, right? This is the patriotic appeal. This is what we do. And we're proud of this work. It's very satisfying. But guess what? The country needs more than us. It needs lots of folks out there. Here's one. Again, I think a lot of us are burned out on the Code Red NIMDA chase the tail in the net problem. So being part of the solution, I think, is a different way to think of it and really a way to get involved. And I don't mean to be flip here, but it's a great time to be a consumer, right? We're all on the net together now. Good guys, bad guys, friends, rivals. It's really an interesting time, and I'm a dinosaur, I have to admit it. My first machines were 300 baud acoustic coupler. Does that ring a bell to folks out there? Very primitive machines, and bulletin boards were like a big thing for me when I was really active in a lot of technical work. The world is so different, and I have 3 kids, and what they do and what they expect out of the net is just amazing to me. And I still expect it all to go away someday, and they just expect it to do more. So it's a really exciting time, and there's a lot at risk here in terms of the way our businesses will operate and the way we as consumers will deal with all this. Okay, if those don't work for you, how about this one here? It's getting crowded out there, right? This flood of, I found yet another vulnerability and yet another incredibly obscure product is really not much of a thrill, I don't think, anymore. And it's important work. I'm glad somebody's doing it. But the idea that by itself is inherently good, I think, is something we have to kind of get rid of. It's really not taking us anywhere. Because it's actually a more challenging and interesting problem than attacking things. By the way, this is the one I can't convince a lot of NSA people to bite on here. But it really is a more challenging problem because there are lots of different opportunities and options, and you don't get to do it by yourself. You have to involve lots of people. So the challenge is really high there to do that. And then when all else fails for me, to me this is the right thing to do. I think it's time to translate what communities like ours know into positive action there. That doesn't mean, you folks that are brilliant at finding problems out there, that's great. We need that. We need the pressure on to find and fix those kinds of problems. What we need is the extra step, though, to translate this into something constructive for the rest of it. Okay, so the hope is working together. I have a specific job responsibility, but we all have a generic responsibility and the ability to work together just to make some progress for the security of our nation's information systems. So, I appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you folks. I appreciate your patience at the message here. I'll be around for the rest of the conference and would love to talk about opportunities to share some ideas with you. On behalf of lots of really bright, really dedicated professionals at the National Security Agency, I do want to thank you for the chance to come to an audience that we don't often get to, but I think, again, the conversation is important for us to get out to places like this and to work with folks like you. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.